Warriors of the Infinite, welcome to Chapter 12 of REN-SHEN Half Spirit, Kumicho. Steve was eager to consult with Temyana about the upcoming meeting with Kumicho. He went to a nearby Buddhist temple and lit some incense to summon her. He was thankful the fearsome samurai warrior next to him was wearing a half mask, otherwise he would not have realized it was Temyana. Steve pleaded with her, "Can you at least be one of the people I've seen before? I'm not sure if I should talk to you or fight you." Temyana promptly reverted back to the elegant older Japanese woman whom Steve had met before. She said, "I'm sorry, I've been having too much fun learning about what has been happening in Japan since the last time I was here. It has been well over a millennium, you know." Steve asked, "You were here over 1,000 years ago? I thought you only assisted my ancestors. Surely none of my ancestors found their way this far." Temyana replied, "Much more than 1,000 years ago. I told you before. I was with the priest king, another of the great ones. Here they call him Daruma, but he started as Skandar, and I have learned who Megumi's people are. The priest king knew Megumi's emperor ancestor very well. They had many wonderful discussions and a very meaningful intellectual relationship. Now I understand much more about your connection to her. Promises were made between the priest king and Megumi's emperor ancestor. It was truly a meeting of great minds. Such a pity the emperor didn't realize his dream. None of that matters now, and it isn't necessary to concern you with the details." Steve thought about Temyana's information and said, "Wait, you said Daruma. Isn't Daruma the name of those little dolls in every Japanese souvenir shop?" Temyana looked at Steve as though he were a backward child. She said, "Daruma, Bodhidharma, Dharmo, Skandar. So many names for the priest king. Yes, he was the founder of Zen Buddhism here in Japan. You really should try to learn some history one day. As I said, he was one of the great ones in your line. But look at you, Ishiganto. I think you will also have many names. But you must know a new name means you will lose a part of your former self. It can happen by choice or it can be taken from you. A curse and a blessing." Steve asked, "We will meet with Kumicho, Megumi's father. Is there any advice you can give me about him? I've heard so many times about how powerful he is. Surely my gift can help me if he tries anything." Temyana replied, "Your gift can beat the man, but the demon is another matter, stronger than you can possibly imagine, and, you must understand, completely foreign to you. He is one of the few. The evil he carries is multi-generational and is as old as the infinite. He carries the sins of his fathers as a badge of pride, and he will confound you with his every breath. Make no mistake, there are forces at play here that even I do not fully understand. But I can see now, this meeting is inevitable." Steve was deep in thought. He knew nothing would be uncomplicated about the encounter. He was almost asking himself as he replied to Temyana, "But if he tries anything, surely I can expel that demon." Temyana interrupted Steve. "You think expelling his demon is a good idea, even if it's possible? To free that evil from the constraints of his human body so that it can roam freely? What if the evil chooses you? Where does the man end and the demon begin? I don't think you understand. This demon is so powerful he even bewitches the gods. When you see major disasters around the world, look to one of the few like him. They're merely creating opportunities for themselves. Listen to me, Steve. You must resist this man's deceptions. He would love to own you, and he owns easily. Do not assume your power will work against him. Oh, and I would recommend you take your sensei with you if you ever meet him. I've seen how he helps your power. If anything happens with Kumicho, it would be wise to have him near. Your line has never been at more risk than now. I've warned you enough times, but you are in his sphere of evil, and I now understand this is your destiny. You must understand, my essence has been preserved for thousands of years now. I know all the worlds, and I can tell you things nobody on earth can. The illusions and deceptions humans use to justify their existence are all just part of a process beyond their scope. Some will rise above their days and nights and break their cycles. I can't help you break your cycle, but I can tell you that a turn towards evil is only rewarded by evil, and that cycle is perpetual. It is the simplest yet most difficult decision you will ever have to make. Temyana faded into the smoke and left Steve to reflect on her advice. Steve always concluded his meetings with Temyana thinking he had learned something extremely important. But he was never quite sure if any one part was more important than the other. Don't be evil seemed to stick out in his mind, which seemed reasonable enough. At least he learned about Dharma and also how sensei might be essential if anything was to happen. He decided to discuss the matter with sensei. Steve found sensei training in his dojo. He admired the toughness of the old man and the obvious power stemming from his connection to the ground. He still found it amazing he was the same person whom he met a little over 6 months ago. So much power in the man, he thought to himself. Sensei was doing kata Steve was unfamiliar with. When he asked about the technique, sensei said, "These are the movements of the Luohan style. I've been trying to merge my essence, my mabui, into these movements. I believe I know more now than when I created Demon Hiro. But in truth, I know enough now to say death is better than spreading the evil I created. I was wrong to try to summon the Luohan when I had so little understanding of the energies at play." "I think I'll need your help, Sensei," Steve said. "We've done some amazing work together when expelling demons. I've felt the way my energy multiplies when you work with me, and I feel your gift is every bit as important as mine. Megumi has agreed to a meeting with her father. I'm sure we all agree he is not to be trusted. But she feels it might help her finally be rid of him. I'm not sure it is a good decision, but I understand why she wants to do this." Sensei was not surprised at all. She is a lovely girl. Her mother's side were healers on this island for as long as anyone can remember. If there is any way I can help, then it's my honor and hopefully my redemption. Steve and Sensei discussed potential scenarios and thought about Demon Hiro's relationship with Kumicho. Who wields his power with such undisputed authority? Sensei spent many years steering away his best students from the impossibly addictive yet evil allure of Kumicho. Steve had often wondered what Kumicho might be like. He was quite sure the man would be something resembling a cross between a smarmy politician and a gangster thug. Yet so many men had given up their mabui to serve him. Steve wondered how and why such strong and capable people such as Sensei Mike, Uncle Taki, and Nakandari Sensei feared Kumicho's power so much. He also couldn't fathom how so many people seemed oblivious to his evil nature. Megumi had reached 29 weeks into her pregnancy and was both physically uncomfortable and extremely nervous about seeing her father. It had been 6 years since they'd last been in the same room together. Before she left, there were heated discussions and accusations made against her father. She was questioning the nature of her mother's death. Her father dismissed her questions and accusations as though he was talking to a little child who didn't know any better. But Megumi knew her mother and was aware that she'd been trying to divorce her father at the time. She had told Megumi how she could no longer remain with such an evil man and had made plans to relocate abroad with her daughter. Megumi had always harboured nagging doubts about the story of how her mother fell while jogging near the Shuri castle. Nothing had ever been resolved, and Megumi remained forever traumatised about her death. The day had arrived. Steve and Megumi had bought some new clothes for the event, and Sensei had even dressed well for the cameras. They arrived at the hospital ahead of time, and Tanya was grateful. She was lying in bed and said, "I can't stop thinking about this. Megumi, we don't have to do this. After all you've done and sacrificed for me, the last thing I'd want to do is anything which would upset you." Megumi smiled warmly as she responded, "Tanya, you've been a wonderful friend to me. We're so happy to have you in our lives. It would be nice to give the hospital some acknowledgement for their amazing work. And if I must face my father, I've decided it's a good thing to do. Please don't even think about it." Steve asked Tanya how close she felt to being her old self. She replied, "Talking isn't a problem now. My legs sometimes still seem to have a mind of their own and still ache with a terrible pins and needles feeling in them. It freaks me out. Every time I stop thinking when I'm doing my walking exercises, I fall over straight away. It's been pretty tough, but I'm so lucky to have you guys around all this time. I owe you my life. Sensei leaned in and whispered into Steve's ear, and Steve replied to Sensei, I've been thinking the same thing. Steve glanced at Megumi and then turned to Tanya and said, I'd like to try something which might help you. It's similar to what I did to protect your neck that night, but I've learned a little more since then, and only now I'm comfortable enough to try it on you. Tanya pleaded with Steve, please, if you can do anything to help, you don't have to ask. You already saved my life once. Anything you can do is more than welcome. I trust you completely. With that, Steve positioned his hands on Tanya's knees and summoned his energy. In a similar way to when he protected her neck, he retained the lion energy and allowed it to radiate around her legs. But this time, Steve breathed into the energy, which seemed to oxygenate it. The warm glow subsided after a few seconds. Steve smiled and stepped back away from her. He looked for any sign of change. Nothing seemed immediately apparent until Tanya squealed with delight. Oh my God, the pins and needles are gone, and my legs feel brand new. Tanya moved herself and swung her legs over the bed and stood up. This is the easiest thing I've done with my legs in over 6 months. I can't believe it, she said. Just at that time, she faltered slightly and Steve caught her and helped her back in bed. Steve said, I unblocked your energy paths, but I think your muscles will need some time to catch up. Soon after, they all heard a commotion outside the room. The news crew had arrived. Steve saw the crew just outside the door, assembling lighting equipment and checking their cameras. There were 4 people in total, including the journalist who entered the room. He introduced himself professionally and immediately began rearranging the space for better lighting and angles. He called the others to help and they were ready. Sensei stepped out of the room and shortly after, a very corporate-looking middle-aged woman hustled into the room and surveyed the environment. She looked very similar to Temyana's elegant Asian woman persona, but seemed to have a bitterness about her which was quite repelling. She had a stern face and was extremely abrupt with everyone, until she saw Megumi. She turned to Megumi and said, Oh, Megumi, it has been so long since I last saw you. You look beautiful, and with a blessed event on the way, as she pointed to Megumi's obvious pregnant state. Her smile and gestures could only be described as feeble attempts at sincerity. It looked as though she was unable to even convince herself that she was being genuine. Steve could see Megumi did not enjoy the company of this woman. Megumi curtly replied, Hello, Nakano. I see you're still working for my father. Is he here? Nakano replied, Oh, the chief hospital administrator wanted to greet him and thank him formally for all the good work he's done for the hospital. They also had a little business to discuss, but he is on his way. He is most eager to see you. Megumi was less than impressed with Nakano's reply. All her life she had heard how her father was doing something extremely important, and it was of absolutely zero interest to her. Her anxiety was peaking as she reached for her husband's hand, and she couldn't help but notice Steve's powerful grip. He was just as anxious as her. Megumi did her best to avoid obsessing about what she would say to her father, but rapid and abstract memories and thoughts continued to race in her mind. Nakandari-sensei! A voice boomed in the hospital hallway. Steve looked at Megumi and there was no room for doubt about who the voice belonged to. You look like a young man, Kiyoshi-san. Perhaps you might teach karate to some of my men, he said in a questioning way which seemed rhetorical. I remember how you used to punish me in your classes, bellowed Kumicho. Sensei quietly replied, Agari-shin, Agari-san. I recall you were a very capable fighter with great potential in my class. I'm confident you have already taught your men a great deal. The voice boomed again. Ha ha! Indeed, indeed. Kumicho entered the room. Steve was sure the room had shrunk. The man who walked in seemed to fill the entire room. He acknowledged everyone upon his entry and headed straight towards Megumi. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he raised his outstretched arms and said, You look positively radiant today, my daughter, as though he had seen Megumi every day since she had returned to Okinawa. Megumi replied, You have not changed one bit, father. He then picked up Tanya's hand and looked deeply into her eyes, asking in perfect English, I hope they have looked after you here, my dear girl. I wanted to make sure you are fine. Is there anything I can arrange for you? Tanya blushed and replied, No, thank you. I've had the best treatment and I'm very grateful for your help. He turned to Steve and said, "Steve Nedelkin, the Macedonian lion from Australia. I've heard so many interesting things about you. Such an interesting young man. Some are even calling you Ishiganto lately. What a handsome husband my Megumi has chosen." He shook Steve's hand and grinned while looking penetratively into his eyes. Steve was shocked. This is no thug or smarmy politician. Refined and distinguished, regal in fact. How old is he? He looks 30, or is it 60 years old? It's impossible to tell. Megumi is taller than him, but he fills up the room. So charming. I don't feel any vibrations. So charismatic. Who the hell is this guy? Steve thought to himself. Steve finally replied as if slapped into reality. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Agadi." It occurred to Steve he only heard this man's given name, Shin, a few moments ago for the first time. Kumicho was the only name he ever used for him. "Oto-san, please, or father. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. We are family after all," said Kumicho. Steve would never call another man father, and promptly decided he would avoid calling him anything at all. The news crew filmed their segment and assured Kumicho it would be a wonderful piece highlighting the efforts the Agadi family have undertaken to help an unfortunate American friend. Kumicho was pleased and spoke to Megumi and Steve. "What a lovely day! I insist you all come to my residence for dinner tonight. I would very much like to welcome you. I will not take no for an answer. I will send a car for you at 7 p.m. He turned to Sensei and said, "Kiyoshi-san, I will expect you there also. It is time we caught up." As quickly as Kumicho swept into the room, he had gone. His voice reverberated throughout the hospital as he called for the chief hospital administrator. Megumi was livid. He pretended as though the 6 years was 6 minutes, and he didn't even wait for our reply when he invited us for dinner. He just expected it, as if we were all his servants. She continued venting with Tanya about her father while Sensei approached Steve. "What did you feel when you were near him?" he asked Steve. Steve said, "I didn't feel the vibrations like I normally do. I felt amazing. Great. What a charismatic man." Sensei smiled and explained, "Drug addicts don't take drugs because they are terrible. They love the feeling and become addicted to it. Kumicho's vibrations are very different indeed. He is the best and worst drug. His vibrations are precisely what you described. You must recalibrate. Whatever you ranked demon hero on your scale, you must now understand Kumicho represents your highest score now. Keep that in mind tonight and listen to yourself." Steve began to second guess himself. Maybe I was captivated by Kumicho's charm. Did I miss any clues about the evil nature of this man? Why couldn't I feel his vibrations? Normally my body instinctively reacts to demons. Who is he? What is he? Steve couldn't stop thinking about Kumicho. He felt so inadequate and ignorant compared to a man of such culture. How could someone from a family of peasants expect to match himself against someone of such culture and refinement? He asked himself. Megumi looked tired from the ordeal and asked Steve if they could leave. She was hungry and most definitely eating for 2 people. She was craving a McDonald's burger, and Steve knew better than to deny his pregnant wife's cravings. They made the journey to Makiminato, a few kilometres away, and discussed the morning's events. Megumi asked Steve what he thought of her father. Steve replied, "I had such different expectations about him. He was so worldly and charming. He seemed larger than life." Megumi rolled her eyes at Steve and said, "That is the outside layer. Peel away the charming exterior and you see the nasty man. He looks like he has learned to conceal it even better nowadays. Don't let him fool you. He's been cruel to me all his life. I don't know what he thought he would do with me. I was always made to feel like I disappointed him because I would never find happiness in his cruelty. He tested me every day of my life. Always made impossible bargains and created situations which rewarded cruelty. To be honest, I've been so worried for our baby. What if the baby carries some of his evil? I can't believe someone would try so hard for so long to encourage his child to become evil. If it wasn't for my sweet mother, I would probably be some evil demon witch hanging off the ceiling ready to eat you," as she poked at Steve. Megumi was increasingly tired and uncomfortable as the pregnancy progressed and asked Steve, "Please take me home so I can rest and find the energy to deal with my father tonight. And tomorrow, We'll start making arrangements to go back to Tokyo. It's time we get our lives back to normal. Steve agreed. It's definitely time to start making some real money so I can feed and house my family properly, he thought to himself. The issue of financial security for his family had been weighing heavily upon Steve. He wanted the best for his wife and his soon-to-arrive baby, and yet he only had the small income stream from Australia. He wanted to prove to both himself and his family that he could be a good provider and be successful in his own right. He always thought he could do anything, but in truth, he had nothing to show for it. Well, brothers and sisters of the infinite, Kumicho walked in that room. Before he even walked in, his voice bellowed out. This powerful voice, this man who was supremely confident. Can you imagine the kind of person he was? Just is someone so powerful. Someone who just, anything he wants, he gets. If he talks to you, you feel as though you're somehow special just for the privilege of him acknowledging you. So how would you be if that situation, a celebrity, someone powerful, someone extremely wealthy, looks at you, acknowledges you, makes you feel important, perhaps offers to do something for you? How tempted could you be? Would you be? This is the world we live in nowadays. Money seems to drive most people. It motivates people. So this man is infinitely wealthy. Of course he amassed wealth. Whatever he wants, he gets. Hasn't been able to get his daughter for the last 6 years. Megumi didn't like that woman who entered the room, Nakano. We'll see a bit more about that soon. So imagine yourself in this situation. You're Steve Nedelkin. You've got some abilities. We've proven that. You've now got a new name, Ishiganto, in your local community. They're acknowledging you for some, in fact, superhuman ability. And yet here you are thinking, well, I've got to feed my wife and my child. I've got to be able to provide for them. The burden of knowing that. And then you meet your wife's father, who is clearly infinitely wealthy, clearly has means and could create opportunities for Steve. Do you think Steve is going to submit to his father-in-law? He didn't want to call him dad, didn't want to call him otosan or father. That was never going to happen, was it? Let's not kid ourselves here. Made the assumption that everyone's attending his place 7 p.m. that evening. No room for doubt. You're all there. We'll see you there. Thank you very much. Out he goes. People like that. Extremely wealthy, extremely powerful. They just assume, and let's call it the Jedi mind trick. When they say something, people tend to listen to them and just follow their commands. It happens all the time. I see it in my day job, when I'm exposed to extremely wealthy people. Somehow they make people jump and dance for them quite well. It would require a very unique personality that would refuse that. Because obviously the lure of financial wealth is attractive to a normal person. So, when the rich person says, do you think you can do that for me? Or I expect you to do that for me, you know that there's going to be an adequate reward for it. We've all been asked to do things by people who've got less money and we'd still do it. So if someone's quite wealthy, perhaps we'll jump through an extra couple of hoops. So Kumicho's got that down to a fine art. He knows how to read people extraordinarily well. And he can manipulate and do whatever. And he tortured his poor daughter. Poor Megumi. From the minute she was born, he'd put her in situations and just challenge her and just hopefully get her to arrive at the cruelest solution, which was the one that was going to be most rewarded for her. She never quite fit the mold in that regard. So our beautiful Megumi stayed that way, has remained that way up until her adult years. So that's pleasing to see, and it's probably why our Steve married her. Let's not kid ourselves. He picked a lovely girl. We're not allowed to say anything bad about Megumi. Never. Mark my words. I had threats from people, random people sending me messages. Do not hurt Megumi. I wouldn't dream of it. We all love her. Anyway, that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 13 is called The Castle. Funnily enough, interestingly enough, Kumicho lives in a castle. You wouldn't think of anything less, would you? You wouldn't expect anything less. So we look forward to that little interaction. What we're starting to see here is a bit of a trend, my dear friends. Things just aren't getting happier at this point, are they? There seems to be increasing tension. We're feeling it. I hope you're feeling it. I'm feeling it. So stay with me. Let's lock our arms in defense against these evil forces. Brothers and sisters of the infinite, we need you. We need to fight together. Okay, that's the end. Please let people know about the book if they're interested in this kind of storyline. I look forward to seeing you in chapter 13. Thank you very much.